Hello.
Good afternoon. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Bit warm, but
Bit warm.
yeah.
Can't really complain, can we? We've had some rather hot weather recently.
No, mustn't grumble.
It's
As
been over 30 degrees. We're in the end of May 2026, and yeah, we've had the hottest ever May temperature just recently, I think. But we're on the other side of that. We're in the low 20s or mid 20s. What about, I'm based here in Stroud in the Cotswolds. What's it like where you are?
I'm based in Stratford-on-Avon, on the other side of the Cotswolds from you, which is considered part of the Cotswolds sometimes, but it's not very mountainous around here. So there we go. Or even
Not
hilly.
sweating today as much as previously.
Fairly warm, fairly warm. But would our viewers and listeners, do you think they want to listen about the weather that much, or have we given them
Maybe
enough?
they want to know who the uh, insert word here we might be and what we are here to talk about.
Maybe you can kick us off on who the whatever insert here we are.
Well, I am Tony Richmond, Esquire, otherwise known as Mr. Tony Richmond. I'm a tutor based here in the lovely Cotswolds, the hills of the Cotswolds, the Stroud Valleys, and I'm uh, fairly established now as a full-time uh, online and face-to-face tutor of science and maths to GCSE and A-level biology and maths. Um, I do both UK-based teaching as well as some overseas online teaching. And I've been doing this full time since I'd say full time since 2015. And before that, I dabbled and built up my workload to make it a full-time job. Um, and yeah, so I have some experience before that in teaching in school in Devon as a science teacher, and before that, where we met, in fact, in China before doing my PGCE, I was teaching English as a foreign language before setting up a biology course in our shared school where we met each other in the south of China. But over to you. Tell us who you are.
Right, we'll do that. William Deacon is my name, and I've been teaching nearly 25 years now. Started in the aforementioned country garden school in China, and I've taught economics and business, preferably economics. I prefer to teach economics. It's more my interest. Mostly A level or international equivalents, IB diploma, and also some GCSE and IGCSE. Um, so most of my teaching has been done through schools. I've taught at four or five different schools now, and I have also been tutoring privately or separately from that, probably starting from again 15, 20 years ago that I would have started initially done it. And I typically have uh, two, three students a year, maybe a few more who I will tutor regularly. So I'm doing both tutoring and uh, teaching formally in schools. And I've also been an examiner for A level for sixth form level, because including IB diploma, economics, I've examined for a range of exam boards over the last 20 or so years. So I've got
So that involves lots of marking. I remember you being quite busy up until particular deadlines. Once the A-level exams have been sat, the exam scripts go to the examiners to be marked, and you're one of those markers. And you've had experience with a couple of exam boards in particular for A-level economics.
yes, uh, as you said, the question now on the 29th of May, the answers will be written for the exam paper I'm marking next. The answer will be written next Thursday, and then they'll come through to me as a marker about 10 days after that. And then it's 3 weeks to a month, pretty intensive work with loads of marking, as you say. And yes, I'm currently marking for AQA. I've previously AQA A level economics, of course, that is. And I've prior to that, I was marking OCR A level economics, and I also back in the day when we were in China, I was marking for IB diploma program in economics. I did that for 4 or 5 years then. That was pre-computer when they used to send me packages of papers and I'd get a whole bundle of them. And it's quite a change. Now it's all online, but previously I'd get piles of papers which I'd have to wade through. Now I do it all online.
So do you now do it online on a screen? All of your marking is screen based? Yeah.
Yeah, it's different exam boards have different software, so there are further challenges entailed in that. But yeah, it's all online now, really. So and
So that
starting
means
in 22.
someone must have, in that 10 days between the students finishing the exams and you receiving the digital version of their script, someone must have been scanning their papers so that you could then see it in that way.
Yep, and don't know if they've managed to automate it or the extent to which they've automated it. Looking at your standard exam paper, though, it seems difficult to automate it. So I don't envy the poor person who has to photocopy all of them or scan them all and get them out to me. But I'll I'll stop moaning about the marking and like choose that job instead of the scanning job, perhaps.
So what we're going to be talking about today mostly is well, for the first half, I guess I act as the naive person when it comes to economics A level, and how a student would do a good job of getting the grade that they aspire towards, hopefully the A or A star end, um, and what that looks like from a examiner and teacher's point of view, from a number of different angles. And then after we've talked about that for um, half of today's conversation, we can switch across to you asking me more about Oxbridge applications and my own experience of that. I failed to mention that I went to Cambridge University back in 1998 to 2001, and what I've learned from that experience, and also how the game may have changed in more recent years, and maybe have a contrast between those two points of view, with some talk about Oxford and what it might mean for Oxford applications as well. So we'll start off, I think, with some questions about economics, and perhaps you can just put it in context. So, what sorts of students would be studying A-level economics in the first place? Just give us the sort of overview, because not everyone knows about economics A-level and what it might lead to and why students might be studying it in the first place.
Right. It economics at A level is gives us a perspective to view the world from, as does any subject, I suppose. But it's largely on a decision-making level about how individuals try to make decisions and about how countries make decisions. So it means that someone with an interest in understanding how a country is organized, how it functions in terms of production, and how resources are allocated within it, that needs to be a general area of interest for students who would benefit from the course. And generally, it would be people who are follow world events, follow or national events, who know what's going on and take an interest in what is happening. Um, and the skill set that is required certainly includes a certain level of numeracy and an ability to manage data and to try and find a story from it. Also, the skill set would involve a decent level of literacy and ability to express yourself in writing, and to with a focus on whatever point is being analysed, so that one could generate an argument to explain clearly a perspective regarding an issue of the day. So I think you need to be fairly numerate, fairly literate, and also have an interest in what's going on in the world and an interest in the way that people make decisions and the way as the production system operates would be the type of person who would fit this.
And there is a distinction between microeconomics and macroeconomics. And I expect that the exam structure reflects those perspectives within economics.
Yes, there are for most of the A level exam boards now, there are three different sections, three different papers. First one's micro, which is individual decision making, and from individual components of an economy, the bits that make up the whole of the economy, and that means like whether when we're deciding whether to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, come up to how firms make decisions about how they're producing and what price they charge and how they manufacture product, and also about how the market system works to allocate resource from individual decision making, and how the government might want to interfere with that or intervene to change that allocation of resource. That's the micro component. Macro is putting all to get together all of those individual components to see how the system works as a whole and to understand whether the government um, is making the system work effectively and is successful in its use of resource in terms of using them all so that the resource is not unemployed, in terms of stability, so that ensuring that the economy is balanced and people can predict what's happened and people are comfortable living within that system and firms are able to invest, and whether people are provided for in terms of growth or national output, how quickly the national output grows to give us all a better standard of living. So that's the micro
So,
macro
okay,
questions on
yes,
both the papers on both them, and then there's a third paper would put them all together and call it
synoptic sort of
simultaneous.
paper.
Yeah, free for all.
Okay, yes, okay. So, yeah, as a biology A-level tutor, um, I would be looking at the detail focused, the biochemistry side of things, how biological molecules work, are constructed, etc., and then zooming out to the macro level, I suppose, the wider system, animal biology, plant biology, maybe how organisms interact in ecosystems and ecology and that sort of thing would be zooming right out at the macro level in biology, which is funnily enough my journey when I was at university. I went from the more micro level to the more zoomed out macro level as my area of interest and telling a story about the system as a whole and trying to make connections between subjects. That's where my interests actually went. How about yourself? Do you have a preferred interest or a specialism within economics that you would gravitate towards?
It does very much depend on what I've been focused on in my teaching. I think that initially, when I was teaching in Asia, I was probably more focused on micro, and I found that uh, fascinating, the way that people make decisions and the different influences on that decision making and people's rationality, of course. Are we rational? That's a big part of economics. We're meant to be rational, are we? Spoiler alert, no, not really. But that was when I was teaching micro. I found it's the psychology, I suppose, of it that really interested me in terms of how people made decisions and also the way that firms operated and the reality of whether they operated according to the theory or not. But more recently, for the last 10 years or so, I've been teaching more macro. So I then, through having to teach it, I suppose I developed greater understanding of how the world economy worked and about again, the connectedness, as you mentioned, the interconnection of everything. It's the connectedness of concepts like exchange rates and productivity and technology changing the productivity and the employment, what people specialization, what people focus on globally, and the interaction of all of these factors made macro more interesting to me more recently because I was teaching it and I was drawing on world examples to explain things like Chinese manufacturing strength, and so it
Sure.
varies. I'm interested in both, really.
Sure. And I suppose a lot of your students come from a GCSE economics background, but some maybe are just studying economics for the first time and just decided that A-level economics was the path for them, maybe to then push them in a certain direction when it comes to university choice and further study.
Yes, very often it starts off with the original idea that people think economics is about money. So they think if they study economics, they'll get rich. And so they often have interest based on that concept of money and the fact that it might help them to make some. And it's possible, it can do, not invariably, but it can do. Um, but in terms of what students might be attracted to it by the concept of money. Uh, but they're also attracted to it at A level because it's new and they've done the sort of sciences and sort of maths, English, whatever the required subjects are. And then you get to A level, you can do something new like economics, and oh, it's about money. That's interesting. I like that. And so they do that. So we do get a fair number who come to it fresh from from doing your standard sort of more traditional GCSE subjects and come to the subject of economics with with an interest in how decisions are made, but with little more than that in as terms of the basis
And
for.
I suppose it very much depends on the school and whether economics GCSE is even offered at particular schools as to what that looks like from the sixth form point of view.
Yeah,
So, if we were to get into um, your sorts of areas of expertise when it comes to the exams, as at the end of this 2 years, presumably that's when the students then sit their final A-level exams, and like you say, there are three papers. Should we start by talking about the individual papers and the sorts of questions that come up in paper one, paper two, paper three, to give the context for then what might be the skill set that are required to do well in each of those exams?
we could do. I would think it's better to start off more general. I suppose in terms of what is really required for in approaching an economics exam. And I think there are general principles which would apply to whichever paper they're sitting, whether it's micro, macro, or a synoptic one.
So, for example, if we're talking about a top level, a middle level, or a low level answer, um, in an economics exam, what are the general differences that you might see between the forms of those answers given that um, might then give us an insight into how students would get the highest marks rather than the middle or low level um, number of marks?
The key factor in determining the level of an answer would be how accurately it sticks to the question asked. And I imagine this is the same in any subject, that you're going to be pretty damn lucky to get a decent grade if you're meandering from the question asked.
So
And
relevance
yeah, relevance.
yeah,
Answer
yes,
the question,
yes,
or as students say, ATFQ, where the F might
yes,
answer the full question, I think is the
yes. Let's pretend.
well,
Yes.
okay. Yes,
And then or even RTQ to then ATQ. I often write RTQ and underline the missing bit of information in the question from biology questions, the students often veer off onto their version of the answer that they would like to give to the answer that the question that they would like to be answering, rather than, as you say, having read the actual question that they're meant to be answering. So that was number one. Okay, I would agree that
Yeah.
that's very
And
important.
yeah, and that gets you to, well, if you don't answer the full question, or if you're not rigorously sticking to the that train of argument, then you will not get out of a low level answer. There's no way that you will. Uh, Beyond that, then in deciding whether something's going to be at a at what level, whether it's middle or higher level, it's really about the quality of the answer in terms, for me, in terms of using economic theory effectively and accurately. So using it in an argument, using it to support an argument and to demonstrate a point. That effective use of theory, accurate knowledge of the theory, and the that's your knowledge and understanding, your ability to apply it to the question. So you're explaining how it works in the context of the question. And then the development of a chain of causation to explain your thoughts on that, to which would be the analysis part or the AO3. So you've got AO1, which is knowledge and understanding, assessment objective 2, which is application, assessment objective 3, which is the analysis, developing the argument, and then 4 is evaluation. And the real skill that you're looking at is the assessment objective 3. That's the determining factor where you've got to be using that theory to explain the answer, explaining how your thoughts are developed, um, are how you're answering the question, applying the theory to answer the question, and finally, I think it's in terms of it being convincing. Really, to get to the top level, it must convince me as a marker that it is realistic, that it is a possible explanation, a plausible explanation for whatever situation is described in the question.
So are we mostly talking here about essay-based answers to questions, or are there some shorter answer types of questions that may be worth only, let's say, 4, 5, or 6 marks? Because from a biology point of view, the AO1 type questions would simply be giving a single word answer on occasion. And then there's the longer form answers, which may be worth, let's say, 6 marks or um, sometimes more. If it's AQA, there could be a 25-mark essay, for example. But in OCR, it's much less likely that you would have questions that are worth that many marks. It's much more often um, a structured question whereby the maximum number of marks would be around 6 marks in most cases. So in economics, are you mostly talking about essay-based long mark questions?
That's where the high tariff, the big marks really lie. That within, for example, the AQA paper, something like over two-thirds, or the AQA A level, around two-thirds of the total marks are available for extended writing, meaning 15 and 25 markers. So that is extended writing. And therefore, I am far more focused on them because that is ultimately what probably determines someone's final grade, really. The there's there's 30 multi-choice in the AQA and the OCR papers, but uh, which would be knowledge based, but also there's a fair bit of analysis in it. There's going to be four marks worth of just straight up knowledge, knowledge and understanding, AO1 questions. There's going to be 8 marks total over the whole three papers of application of being able to process data and use that to um, explain the situation. So a little bit of analysis, but mostly application there. Then there's probably about 15% of it would be analysis based. So being able to explain a chain of causation, which can get into later, explaining how that chain of causation works. And then the rest, which, as I said, is two-thirds or more, is going to be the quality of your argument, really, and your ability to say what it depends on, what criteria, what provisos your argument might rest on.
So maybe we can give an example question that would be accessible to someone like me who doesn't have a lot of background in economics, purely from a popular economics book reading perspective, perhaps, or a curiosity about how the world works from a social science point of view. Um, so how important would then context be in the answer to this question that you might make up or provide? And should students always include real world examples? And how many should they include if it is necessary?
Right, that's a good question. And I would suggest that, well, let's base it on a potential question to try and ground it in something. And a topical question would be something like, is globalization always of benefit to a developing country, for example? And one, uh, in terms of using the real world context, something like that would be very topical at the moment because, of course, you've got a sort of kickback against globalization, which has we've experienced globalization for, well, you could say millennia probably, but more accurately, certainly the last 100 years, we've experienced globalization with increasing trade and so on. But there has been a reversal of that, I suppose, with Brexit vote, like UK become previously being part of Europe and then distancing itself from that. There's a lot of argument against sort of the interdependence of and the interconnectedness with Europe, which would have represented part of globalization, a sort of extension of our connectedness. And we've gone against that. And in the same way, the current president of the United States has been heard. I think his phrase was that the word tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language, or something like that. Which is his view. Other opinions are available, of course. And if one were writing an essay about is globalization always of value to a developing country, then you would say that much less so now, and you would use that idea of Trump putting his tariffs of up to 50% or on Chinese products or whatever his more outlandish threats have been. And so that would be very valid. And as a marker, when I'm reading that, if someone is saying, previously it was of great value because they could sell their product to America, get money, get revenue to fund their own development and improve education and so on in their country. Now they're less able to because their products have become more expensive, and the Americans would be put off buying product from developing countries because it's going to be too expensive with the tariffs imposed. So yes,
So it sounds like you are modeling a very high level answer there for a student who understands the modern context of the question being asked and bringing in some of their understanding from current affairs and current political events and integrating that into their answer to make it very contemporary? Is it always a good idea to bring in um, more recent events rather than go back to perhaps more traditional textbook examples that might have been established in previous eras of education, even in a good answer or an excellent answer?
Yeah. It makes it more interesting. As a marker, I'm going to have 150 plus scripts for starters, and I'm going to be reading 150 essays on answering this question, for example, as to whether globalization is of value to a developing country. And if I'm reading the same old again and again, as a marker, I am also a human being, and I might find it a bit heavy going if I'm just reading the same old, and it might get a little bit less interesting, shall we say, to the
Interesting.
marker.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always talk to my students about think about how you're going to please the examiner or get the examiner on your side with your answer. I often talk about buzzword bingo as a game that is relevant, especially in GCSE, but also in A-level biology. Try and predict what sorts of words might be on the mark scheme that you then have to connect in a logical sequence to gain access to the most number of marks. Is there a similar sort of game that you might be able to play in economics?
You could certainly try to understand where the question is focused and what an economics teacher would have said, or what would be the obvious ramifications or impact of that situation described in the question. So there is great value in in seeing what is a natural extension of that question and what topics would be raised in answering it effectively. But it is also misleading to be too mechanical about it and say that as economics, it's a dismal science, it's social science, people aren't rational. You can't uh, there is no correct answer, I suppose. And that means that it is made correct by people arguing it convincingly.
I see.
Therefore,
Yes, that is
there
a
is
big
value.
difference.
Yeah,
Yes,
there is value, but we're trying to be a science here in economics, and sometimes we can be convincing as a science, but not invariably because people can behave irrationally. So yes, try to spot what the question's asking for and what would be the textbook kind of approach to it. And in a way, that is often your analysis component would be the textbook version of like globalization, that question about globalization being a benefit to a developing country. The obvious answer would be yes, it is of value because they can focus it, specialize in whatever they're good at, whether it's growing coconuts or providing labor for other things, or whatever their natural resource is that they have in abundance or they're best at is most available. That will determine what they are good at making, and then they can focus on making that, and they can sell that to the rest of the world, probably at a better price and a better value, a better opportunity cost, to use the economic term. And that's your textbook, that's your analysis. So that's pretty much standardized. And I don't think economists would usually argue about that, but it's where to really add the value. You put in the real world application, say, but if you've got someone in the White House who is putting tariffs on everything, then you can't do it. Ain't going to happen. And so that would be your evaluation, which is your real world sort of, does this work in the real world? That is a good evaluative point on it. And similarly, your evaluation could go in other directions on would it work in the real world? What would it depend on? So obviously, if it's something like you're exporting wood, hardwood or something, then it's very bulky. It might cost a lot of money to transport. If you're trying to export papaya or fruit or whatever, then it might rot. It might be perishable. So it's using that sort of provisos and what contingencies, what it might depend on, that will take it up to a level. So you're starting with the basics, the textbook stuff, and then I think you're adding value sort of in the specific context of the question asked and using real world examples if you can. And
It sounds like that needs to come later though, and getting the groundwork in place and as you were just saying, starting with the basics to make sure that you're letting the examiner know the depths of your knowledge from the foundations upwards before then developing the answer in those sorts of directions might be a good exam strategy to get all of the marks that might be available.
yes, you would need to present the textbook view really before you can um, go against it, before you can start picking holes in it and saying whether it is valid in the real world.
I notice this sometimes in biology that students almost feel like they have to dive straight into the deep end before they've established those first principles, and they almost are uh, believing that the examiner knows what they're talking about before they've set down um, those basics in the first place. I would often tell students the examiner can't read your mind. You can't uh, just assume that they know what you're talking about, even. Do you find that is often true in economics, that students make assumptions that the examiner knows what they're talking about and hasn't established that baseline level of necessary information?
Very much so. I'm glad you asked that because I see it as a major failing of many exam answers that I see, that they do not explain the basic concepts clearly enough. Again, in the context of the question and with the right focus in answering the question set. But you need to present those ideas accessibly, demonstrate your own understanding of that theory in the context of globalization. Like I said, comparative advantage would be the economic concept in terms of countries, a developing country producing coconuts or mangoes or whatever they want to sell to the rest of the world. They would have comparative advantage in that. You would need to explain what is comparative advantage, meaning they can produce at a lower opportunity cost.
Define
And
your terms. Yeah,
yes, you define it, but also you'd explain that as if I would advise students, you explain that as if you are talking to someone who is totally ignorant on the subject. I mean, you could
yes,
you could say like tell it to a child, like you're
yes,
telling a 5-year-old. Make it clear. And if you are making it clear, then you are doing a good job, even if you do think it's rather oversimplified, but there is value in explaining them,
sure.
in
Now,
explaining the
I
basic
also
points.
I also think, as well as being an essay-based subject, economics also does have a lot of maths in it, and there are a lot of students who I tutor who do economics alongside, for example, maths and even further maths, and are looking to do economics at universities that require maths A level, or sometimes even require further maths A level. So, could you give me the context of which sorts of universities might require economics in that context with more maths, and then maybe talk about the maths that you encounter in the economics A level.
Right. Certainly Oxbridge but Cambridge economics, you'd certainly need further maths, and uh, Oxbridge, well, management, what is it? Economics and management, I think is a big one at Oxford now. You would need for further maths. I'd be very surprised if you could get in to do that without further maths. I think you need to be an exceptional, truly exceptional student to get in without that. Um, to do economics at any of, certainly the top end of the Russell Group ones, like the London ones. I know LSE, UCL, probably King's too. They would need further maths for it. Durham would need further maths, I would think. Bristol probably is, like the sort of bigger name universities are all going to want further maths and a decent showing in that. So that's their expectation for students who will be successful at university economics. But, but at A level itself, your knowledge of economics, you've got to be numerate, really, meaning understand data, be able to process figures and be able to tell a story from given data. But it's not terribly highly developed or sophisticated mathematically at A level. Um, for example, um, the a concept like elasticity of demand would relate to a derivative, like the rate of change of one factor when another changes. Um, but they would not at A-level economics ask you to mathematically assess that as a derivative or to process it mathematically. They would just expect you to understand it. So it's the A-level economics would require you to understand fairly simple maths, I suppose, be able to interpret data from charts and from tables, and maybe you'd have to calculate sort of rates of change or percentage changes, I suppose I should say, and whether be that from tables or graphs. Index numbers, for example, are used fairly frequently in economics, but it's not demanding at A level. But when you get to university, then it suddenly becomes you have to differentiate everything and sort of work out your own formulae for economic for again to generate economic formulae and understand where they're coming from, which would be a higher level of maths. So that's why they want when you do it at university, you are going into it's very much a mathematical application, a subject using mathematical application in a whole range of different areas. Whereas,
Now, presumably, then in the
sorry.
A level, you do find that students who are studying maths or even maths with further maths are better at these calculations, or do you have some students who maybe don't make the connections with economic theory and therefore struggle with the maths because of that mistake in their thinking?
Yeah, it's more like being sort of street smart, I think, or just alert to implications of being able to look at a chart and say, "Oh, that's going up. That means that there's growth," and be able to eyeball, I suppose, a percentage change. Say that's going up by 5% a year, and if it's growth, it's good. If it's price level, it's less good. So uh, that. I find that the majority of students, if you're going into A-level economics, you'd need sort of probably seven or so at the standard GCSE in maths, and probably
Right.
something similar in English to be able to cope with it. So it's you need to like I say, you need a certain level of competence, but it should be within the grasp of most people doing who are going on to sixth form studies.
Sure. Okay. So let's think about this time of year. Obviously, students are pretty much bang in the middle, this being half term, in the middle of their either GCSEs or A levels at this point. And some of them are experiencing a fair bit of anxiety. Presumably, you're seeing some of your students struggling, and others are coasting and continuing to be confident. Um, do you have any suggestions as to how students can best manage their exam stress and perform at their best when taking exams?
I think that being organized is always a good idea. In terms of organizing your time, and a sensible way to organize your time is not just sort of burn your candles at both ends and be sort of revising 24/7 and at the expense of your health and your mental well-being and whatever. You need balance, and I think a clear schedule to as to when you're going to revise, probably what topics you're revising when, and uh, f- sticking to that fairly rigorously is of value. Also, giving yourself time to sort of let your hair down, as far as you got any. Um, and relax, whatever it is you do to relax, go out for a walk, or watch whatever it is you watch these days on your social media or on TV. Yeah, give yourself a bit of time for that. Make sure you're eating regularly, properly. Get sleep. I mean, sleep patterns. I could never do an exam on sort of having stayed up all night cramming, but that'd be me. Understand yourself. Know how you operate, but a good night's sleep for me would be of great value. Sort of keeping regular sleeping hours, um, and try not to get too sort of stressed about it, because one can be one's own worst enemy by sort of getting frantic about, oh God, I don't know this, that, and whatever, and then just sort of getting more and more uptight about it. You want to avoid um, doing that. And that leads me to my final point, really, that there is no substitute for looking at past papers. And
Mm.
hopefully, any student would have had time to practice at them. If not, I suggest that even if no one's going to look at what work you've done, your answers, it's still worth sitting down and tackling an exam paper under exam conditions, and with rigorous timing, so that you are more familiar with how well you can handle that situation when you're put into an exam in the exam hall. Then you're going to at least be familiar with how the process works and how you respond to it. So past paper practice, and be as familiar as you can with the questions that have come up, and also with how you respond to them, and how you're going to the order you do the paper, the questions in, and how whether you plan or not, plan answers, and your own approach to it. So that is generally generated and refined by practice.
Absolutely. Yes. I often find that students may not want to put themselves in the situation of doing a full paper under timed conditions. They may not have the energy um, to do so. But maybe there's a second best strategy, which might be to do half a paper and just do the odd questions, or just do the even numbered questions that still has value and still gets them eventually doing a whole paper. Is there anything along those lines that students who may not have the attention span or the motivation to do a full paper in between exams at this time of year might find value in?
Certainly. You'd find, for example, the paper three, which I'll be marking for AQA in starting in a couple of weeks, that there's a 30 multi-choice questions, then there's a 10, 15, and 25 mark answers. So a logical split would be that you got the 30 multi-choice, and you should really be doing that 2 hours for the whole lot, 2 hours for the 80 marks of the whole paper. So you should really be looking at for those 30 multi-choice questions, no more than 45 minutes, really. But good students would probably do it closer to 30 minutes. Then for your essay, you could give yourself, say, 1 hour 20 for the 50 marks in the essays. So that would apply for the remaining economics exam. You could split up the paper. The multi-choice would go very well within a sort of 40-minute period. You could, for the essays in general, 25 mark. 25 marks, you would give yourself like 37 and a half minutes, would at a minute and a half a mark, would be standard. So if you said, right, I'm giving myself 40 minutes for this, and then you find one of the essay questions, make a plan, write an answer, in giving yourself that strict 40-minute window to do it in, that would be a valuable exercise on its own without having to sit through the whole exam. So yes, you can break it down. The odd even thing wouldn't work so well in economics because of the structure of the paper, but you can like section A and section B in
Yeah,
the papers one and two. Again, an hour on each would be of value. So yes, you can break it up. Yeah.
perfect. Okay. Um, so it sounds like there's a lot still to talk about, but we can only do so much in the available time. So, is there any closing thoughts that you might have regarding A-level economics and how students might best approach their remaining exams?
I still can't really get away from the answer the question idea because I have memories of students in the past who were very well prepared for questions on, for example, the balance, the foreign balance of an economy, meaning the balance of payments or the balance of trade with other countries. They're very well prepared for that. And then when they got a question on the government budget balance, they wrote about the foreign balance instead because that's what they'd chosen to prepare or had focused on in their sort of preparation for the exam. And the that essay on the budget balance was awarded 0 out of 25 because they wrote it about the foreign balance, having failed to read the question. He still got a
Yes.
B grade. God only knows how,
Right.
but I he'd worked extremely hard and he'd done everything, all the necessary, apart from like he'd just misread the question, gone off on one about what he wanted to write about, and we didn't. We were pleased he got a B, but he could have got an A if he'd got a. That could have nudged him up to an A grade, which would have been an excellent result for him. And he'd done everything else right. Just one silly mistake. So it's got to be just read the question at the end of the day. That's
Make sure you're answering what the question is asking you.
totally,
Yes,
totally.
perfect.
Right. I suppose, given the time constraints, we should close this one now, and hopefully, dear listeners, you will find some nuggets of wisdom and inspiration, even for your coming exams, whenever they may be. And good luck,
And hang tough.
and hang tough. Anything else they got to do?
Stick in there. Keep plugging away. Carry on.
Carry
What's
on,
what's the British?
yeah. Keep
Carry
calm and
on,
carry
carrying
on.
on.
Yeah, carry on, carry
Calm
on.
and carry on.
It's not like Winston Churchill. He had a bit ruder than that, but are we rude on this? We're probably not, aren't we?
Probably not allowed to be rude, not on this particular channel.
Best not. But you can refer to it. You can search what Winston Churchill said if you really want to know. But anyway, I won't.
Perfect.
You can find it. You work that out for yourself. Bye
Good
bye.
luck, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Good luck. Bye bye.